Yeah, I've got it on. Okay, so as soon as Laurel says go, we'll go. Okay, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started on today's Dharma talk. On the third Sunday of the month, we'll usually take something out of the Buddhist literature and go through it and kind of figure out what it's supposed to mean. One of the interesting things about most of these, I'm trying to think, about the sutras is, they weren't written in English. They weren't written for an English-speaking audience. So we're kind of stuck with, trying to deal with something that's, basically been through a game of telephone over several hundred years. And so we may or may not have some accuracy issues there, and to a very, very different use of language. What was originally, or what these were originally spoken of and what they were done is everybody knows that for the first 400 years after the Buddha taught, these were all oral traditions. And they weren't written down until he'd been dead for about 400 years, and they were written down in Sanskrit. So as they come to us, they typically went from Sanskrit to Chinese to either Korean or Japanese into English. Okay, so that's a lot of room for error. So we get to something like the Heart Sutra, and it's really difficult to get at what they're really saying here. We chant the Heart Sutra. We chant it every Sunday. We chant it a couple of times during the week. We chant it at all of our, every time we have a function such as a marriage or something like that here, or even a funeral. So this is something we repeat over and over and over again. Matter of fact, if you come on a Sunday and you look around the room, a lot of the people aren't even following along. They've done it so many times they've memorized it, and or at least memorized to the point where they can just follow along as other people are reading it. But we really don't stop very often and say, okay, what are we saying here? And it's interesting because the Heart Sutra itself is a conversation between two people. One of those people is a mythical being that may or may not have ever existed. The other one is a historically verified person. So, we've got this conversation going between these two people. One of the things that you'll notice if you do a lot of study of Sutra, you notice how many of them start with, "Thus I was told," "Thus it was," on and on and on. You get that opening paragraph, the science, the teaching. You've all heard that one. You notice how it's not here. It's not in this one. So what's the first thing that might tell you?
Well, it might tell you what?
About the sutra itself.
Is that, at least in all the Pali Sutras it all begins with "Thus I have heard,"
right?
In this one, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about it, right?
That's an interesting point. I like that, but I was going for something different. This one probably was written a lot later. Okay, so this one probably does not go all the way back to the original Indian sources that you just mentioned.
Right.
The earliest known copy of this is written on a palm leaf from 649 AD. And in 661, there's a version that was actually chiseled into stone. And that version, both these versions are still with us. And it has not changed appreciably since then. We just had Claire reading there. We have it on a scroll hanging in the kitchen. I had no idea what that scroll was. And Claire sitting there reading it, in Chinese, which was interesting.
That was the translation, the version of translation done by Shinjin. And he's one of the monks who went to India to sort of, study and take back all the script to China in Tang Dynasty.
About what time period would that have been?
You got me there. I'm not really good at history, but probably 100 and 200 years after, maybe 700 or 800 AD.
I'm really glad you shared that with us. That's fantastic information.
I can share more, I can find more material. I was reading this recently. But yeah, that's where it was coming from.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And when you think about the date, 649, 761, the 700s, like Claire mentioned, Buddhism had only been like formally codified in China for about 150 years when this happened. Okay, so that's really interesting. What most historians think is that the Heart Sutra came from several longer Tibetan sutras that were called the Prajnaparamita Sutras that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines long. So this is kind of one way to look at the Heart Sutra was this is kind of a short crystallization that uneducated people could recite and memorize that was kind of the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism at that time. And it's been passed down to us. The Heart Sutra is one of the sutras that pervades all of Mahayana Buddhism. So if you were to go to Tibet, they'd still be using the Heart Sutra. If you were to go to Korea, go to China, the Heart Sutra still exists without a lot of variation. So it's interesting just from that historical standpoint. Okay, so it starts off, it blasts us with the Sanskrit right at the beginning. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, while deeply practicing Prajnaparamita. What's that mean? Does anybody know who Avalokiteshvara is?
It's the Bodhisattva of compassion.
Bodhisattva of compassion. Okay, so this is somebody we don't have any historical record of. Does everybody know what a bodhisattva is? Yeah. Bodhisattva is someone that has achieved enlightenment, but instead of leaving the wheel of existence to exist in nirvana, they stay here with us as an example and as a teacher. So that's a pretty big sacrifice. I could just go wander off into a world of endless bliss, but I'm going to stay here with you people. But the funny thing is we all take that vow at the end of every service. I vow to free all beings. I vow to be a bodhisattva. So that's interesting right there. Prajnaparamita is Sanskrit for kind of great perfect wisdom. The perfecting of wisdom. So while Avalokiteshvara is in this state, we get this other person, Shariputra, that essentially we can kind of assume, from what Avalokiteshvara starts speaking with, is Shariputra's like, I don't get it. Help me here. And Avalokiteshvara takes compassion on this poor tortured soul and says, okay, I'm going to explain it to you. So that's essentially what we've got. And it's really interesting that it's not attributed to a teaching of the Buddha. Shariputra was one of the Buddha's original followers. And a lot of times you see depictions of the Buddha, there are two male and two female followers standing behind him. One of those male followers was Shariputra. Okay, so obviously a very historically important figure. It's interesting, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva also exists in just about every sect of Mahayana Buddhism. A lot of different names. There's a bunch of completely unpronounceable Sanskrit names I'm not even going to try. There's a Tibetan name that I'm going to butcher also, but in Japanese, it's known as Kanon. And one of the really interesting things about Avalokiteshvara is throughout all these different cultures and through different, mythological structures, changes gender. Some Avalokiteshvars are male, some are female. Just as an interesting side, I don't know if most of you know, but in the Old Testament, in the original Hebrew, the concept of God does the exact same thing. About a dozen names for God, about 3/4 of them are male and about 1/4 of them are female in the Old Testament, in the original Hebrew. So that it's just kind of interesting that this model of compassion is sort of genderless. Yeah.
To build on that point, one of the first times I ever learned about Ashkiba Kanan in this context, that there's a statue in Japan of Kanan, and he has like 100 arms sticking out like from all different directions. What that's supposed to symbolize is that Kanan works through all of us, works through all societies, each arm representing a different person, a different entity. And that's what gives Kanan that genderless sort of identity.
I like that.
Right. That rocked my world.
It's interesting stuff for sure. Okay, so a little bit about Shariputra. A couple of things that I thought were interesting is that the Gautama Siddhartha was not of the priest clan. He was of the warrior clan, which is kind of interesting that he becomes one of the most important spiritual teachers of all time, that he was not of that clan. He was not a priest. Shariputra was a Brahmin that had taken the vows of an ascetic and was living in the wilderness with various teachers, and heard the teachings of the Buddha through another monk and said, I've got to go find this guy. And so that's what he did. And he spent the rest of his life with the Buddha, studying with the Buddha, and he died a few days before he did. And this traumatized a couple of the senior monks, and they went to the Buddha and they said, we need you to make sense of Shariputra's death for us. And he said, well, it's like this. The Sangha is this enormous tree, and one branch falls off and the tree adapts and just keeps growing. The tree stays strong and healthy. Shariputra was just one of the branches, and you got to focus on the tree, not the individual branch. I thought it was kind of interesting. So he dies a few days before the Buddha, and we don't know at what stage, in his development or is in his understanding that this conversation occurred. But so we're left with this conversation with the Bodhisattva of compassion. And if you read through this, when Avalokiteshvara starts to speak, starts with form doesn't differ from emptiness. Emptiness and form are the same thing. We've all chanted this dozens of times. Sensations, perceptions, formation, consciousness are also like this. All dharmas are marked by emptiness. They don't arise. They don't decrease. They're not pure. They're not defiled. And since we know there is emptiness, there's no form, no sensation, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. So that's, he just used those same 5 terms in the previous paragraph. Well, at the very beginning, when he said he clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty, those are the 5 aggregates. Okay. Form, sensation, perceptions, formation, and consciousness. Okay, so what these things are, these are what our brain does. That's what the 5 aggregates are. They're also referred to in Sanskrit as the 5 skandhas. This is how your brain operates. Okay, so we've got Shariputra saying that, those things are empty. Okay, and from here, we go into, no sensation, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, it's just, that none of these things exist. And these are what are called the 4 ayatanas. The 12 ayatanas or the 12 abodes. They're essentially your senses. They're everything that you can take in. Okay. And then from there, you've got the 12 nadanas. Okay. So that is essentially, there's neither ignorance or old age. Ignorance and old age and death don't really exist, is what he's saying. They're empty. There's no suffering. There's no cause. So that's, that is the chain of dependent origination. Okay, so what we've got is we've got these 3 things. We've got the way our brain interprets the world. We've got how all the information comes in. Okay, and then we've got all the aspects of our lives that are leading to attachment and leading to delusion. So essentially everything about your life, how you interpret the world, how you're bringing information to the world inside to interpret it, and all the different events of your life. We've got the Bodhisattva of compassion saying these things are empty. Okay, this is, if you just look at that, this is like the most nihilistic thing I've ever read in my life. And every time I think about nihilism, the first thing I think of is The Big Lebowski. Do you remember that scene when there's this guy floating around in the pool, obviously bombed out of his mind, and there's a bunch of liquor bottles floating in the pool with him? And she go, yeah, he's a nihilist. He doesn't believe in anything. I love that scene because you're like, so that's what it means to be a nihilist. It's just be, bombed out zombie floating around with a bunch of liquor bottles. So, I think that what Shariputra was trying to say is that what a delusion is. He's trying to tell Shariputra, here's what a delusion is. And it is getting too bound up. What's going on in your head? Getting too bound up in how you're taking in the information and the events of your own life. Okay? I mean, that's what I think is going on here. We're going to open it up for everybody else's interpretation, and I'm sure you guys have got some very good ones. But I think that what Shariputra couldn't get his head around was Shariputra was convinced that all of these things he was going through were reality. And Avalokiteshvara saying, wait a minute, don't be too sure that what you think and what you feel are reality. That it is your job in your life to get to the point where you can tell what reality really is. Okay? I mean, because otherwise, I mean, this, in some ways doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're going to tell me I don't have any eyes and ears, that I don't, that my mind's not doing something. I mean, you're telling me that I'm not going to die and that I'm not ignorant. Those things can't possibly be true. I'm sitting right here. I'm looking at you. You're here. I mean, all of us are sitting right here. It's kind of like, when they asked Boswell to refute Berkeley's philosophy, and Boswell just kicked a rock. And Samuel Johnson, not Boswell. He goes, I refute Berkeley thus, just by kicking a rock. We're obviously still here. These things are, so it's obvious that Avalokiteshvara is speaking in a very figurative sense, not a literal sense. But I really think that what Avalokiteshvara is getting at is if you don't learn to separate what's reality from what's not reality and get bound up in your own delusions, you're going to wind up that bombed out zombie floating around with a bunch of liquor bottles in a swimming pool someplace. Okay? In a way, Shariputra is like saying this is how not to lose your life. So when he uses the word emptiness, by saying all dharmas are marked by emptiness, everything you're going to perceive could be empty. It doesn't mean that no, these things don't exist. Obviously, these things do exist, but might not be what it seems to be. So if you look at, what are the three easiest ways to be deluded?
Intoxicant.
Well, okay, that's not going to help anything.
I think.
Ignorance, greed, and anger. When you look at we've got the Tibetan map of the cosmos out there, and you get to the very center, and there's a snake, a bird, and a pig all trying to eat each other. Ignorance, greed, and anger. So what happened? I mean, how would this look if we rewrote the Heart Sutra, and instead of saying no eyes, no ears, no tongue, no body, no mind, no realm of sight, no realm of my consciousness, we took all those things away. We took the 5 aggregates. We took, the 12 worlds of the senses. We took the chain of arising and ceasing of origination. And what about it said? We said, no anger. There is no anger. There is no ignorance. There is no greed, because you didn't let your brain invent it. You put the work in to see reality as it really is. So you are free from greed, ignorance, and delusion. So I think because you get to this point in the sutra where Avalokiteshvara switches gears, and that's where you get to with nothing to attain. Once you give up all of these constructs of how you see the universe, Bodhisattva relies on prajnaparamita, relies on great wisdom, and then the mind is without hindrance. And without hindrance, there's no fear. Because you look greed, hate, delusion. What's the source of all of those? Fear.
Arrogance too.
Yeah, well, I would say arrogance is a result of fear.
No.
You know, all these things are, you know, without hindrance. Once your mind is free from this, you're without. There is no fear. Far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. So what Avalokiteshvara is saying, this is how to do it, is to see reality for what it is. And he says that all Buddhas of past, present, and future have done this, and they've achieved enlightenment. And so therefore, understand that the key to this is prajnaparamita. And then we get to the last line, which I think is really interesting. Gate, gate, paragate, parasam gate, bodhisattva. Anybody know what that means?
It's going, gone. Don't look back.
Gone
Yeah,
to where? Other shore.
yeah.
Gone to the other shore. And sava just means well put, well done. So, I mean, basically, this is ending with gone to the other shore. Hell yeah. You know, how this is ending up.
But I can't go.
What's it?
But you can't go because you're a bodhisattva.
Well, you go, but you come back, you know. I mean,
Right,
it's
right,
like,
right.
you know,
You can't stay and like it.
you can't stay and like it. Yeah,
You can take the L train to Brooklyn.
sure. Yeah. But, you know, as we know from the folklore of the Buddha, you know, the Buddha walked into nirvana and they said, you're free, you stay there, you can stay here. And he said, I can't leave them. I got to go back. And so that's what he did. And we kind of have to kind of guess that that's what, you know, the deal that all bodhisattvas make is I can't leave them. And we all vow not to leave them. I vow to free all beings. So, so I think that that's really what Avalokiteshvara is saying, that it's not about the nihilism. You know, it's not about, you know, these things don't exist. The world doesn't exist. You know, one of our great adages in Zen Buddhism is, you know, don't mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon. And not only can our teachers become fingers pointing at the moon, we can become our own finger pointing at the moon. You know, by getting really hung up on what we think, you know. And if we go through this and if we can change that out to, you know, instead of no eyes, no ears, no tongue, no body, no mind, to, you know, no delusion, no fear, no greed. I mean, then from there, think about what else you could do with your life. No depression, no violence, no lust, or no causeless lust, you know. And then that just dovetails right into the precepts, because those are all the things that we vow to do when we take the precepts. So I think that this is, you know, historically why this sutra became so pervasive is because it's a condensed roadmap. You know, you have this guy saying, you know, to this, you know, highly enlightened being, you know, help me here. I can't figure this out. And the enlightened being just says, well, it's simple. Don't assume that what you're thinking is reality. Get to the point where you can see reality for what it is, and you're going to be free. Because I think once you can really see reality, you know, the urge to hurt anybody else, the urge to take from anybody else, the urge to take what you don't need, I think all those things go away, or hopefully they go away. So that's what I took from the Heart Sutra. So I'd like to just you had your hand up a minute ago. I just kept barreling on. Sorry about that.
If
Yeah.
we're opening the floor,
But that's that's
Floors.
floor is open.
I was gonna say for the point earlier, but I have a different point. The point earlier was I've seen Thich Nhat Hanh's translation translate the last line is going to the other shore without having left this shore. That's how he translates that, which I thought was interesting. But the point I guess I want to make now is one of my favorite parts of reading the Heart Sutra is when it gets to the point where it's talking about no path, no knowledge, and no attainment, which I feel is a callback to the Four Noble Truths of having no path. And whereas originally in the Buddha's original teaching, it's like, oh, here's the Four Noble Truths, followed by these, and you'll attain. Whereas with the Heart Sutra, it's kind of like, that's all bull crap. Those are just like conceptions in your mind. And I feel like that's like a more Mahayana type of way of thinking. But
That's really interesting, and I'm really glad you made that point, because Red Pine, in his analysis of the Heart Sutras, is almost the same thing. He says, yeah, this is an illusion, or literary device to, anybody that had grown up in this tradition would have recognized that, and so yeah, he's saying, yeah, there's nothing to the Four Noble Truths either, which is a little bit extreme. I mean, that's kind of a radical thing, but then again, Zen's full of those kinds of ideas. You meet the Buddha on the road, kill him.
yeah.
And I think what he's really trying to say, or what's really trying to be said there is, you remember, the Buddha's dying words, "Oh, my monks, be a light unto yourselves." I mean, I think what he's trying to say there is like, yeah, you can adhere to these things, you can study these things, but you're gonna have to figure this out on your own. There's nobody in there but you, hopefully. Yeah, so that's how I would interpret that.
Yeah, I just think it's super beautiful. Like it's really just like the level of reference.
Yeah, because it like leads right into and with nothing to attain. Yeah, I mean, think about what your life would be like with nothing to attain.
You'd be the dude.
Yeah.
You'd be the dude.
I'm a beautiful with some liquor bottles.
Yeah, you'd be the dude. Yeah.
I think. I don't know what I think, but
Well, it sounds like then you're on your way. Okay. Yeah.
No, it's just like I used to live in Thailand, right?
Mhm.
And obviously the dominant sect there is Theravada Buddhism, which is, I suppose, but I'm not going to get too nitty gritty the detail, but obviously you have monks, right, walking around, and they're like, I would hope that they're serious about their practice, right? But and it's like, you go to a mountain in like southern Thailand, and you're like, you're not allowed to approach without having all of like your clothes covered, and because like the monks aren't allowed to see like skin or anything like that, and it's like there's a lot of effort, right, to pursue that like monastic path. Right? It takes a lot of, that's just not really accessible or practical to the average common person, right? Like, there's almost two approaches, right, where you have the Four Noble Truths, right, and the Noble Eightfold Path. And you can basically hack your brain to rewire how you perceive reality and attain nirvana that way. The other way, I'd argue the Mahayana way, right?
Yeah.
It is more just coming to the realization, yeah, you could put in all of that effort, right? You could put in all of that hard work, and some of that is definitely warranted. But you can get there living your life, your every average day, ordinary existence, and still get wire into that just by resonate.
Well, what you've just described is the great philosophical division between Mahayana and Hinayana.
Right.
Yeah, and that concept would not have happened had Buddhism never been introduced into China. And because one of the things that you see in Mahayana Buddhism that you don't see in Hinayana Buddhism is you see the influence of Taoism.
Yeah.
And what happened when those two philosophical ideas started to mesh is the idea that, this seeing reality for what it is available to anybody.
Right.
If you are willing to do the work that the Buddha did, you become the Buddha yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
If I can add, whether you're a monk or a layperson,
Right. Which I think is
open to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a very
crucial
important distinction that needs to be made.
And then you fast forward, to the 12th century in Japan when Dogen taught. And one of the things that Dogen said, he said, it's going to be more difficult for lay people. Being a lay person and trying to do this is harder work. I mean, think about it. You go into a monastery, like you just described, you go up on the mountain in Thailand and nobody's going near those guys. All they have to do all day is sit. Right. Community's taking care of them. Their community's feeding them. They live on the grounds of the monastery. They're free from distraction. you gotta commute to work, you got a job,
Things
family.
get complicated in samsara, basically.
Yeah. But it's probably harder work for you to do it this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's definitely harder.
It's definitely
it's definitely, yeah, because it's like, right, on the Saturday, we're going to give the ceremony to take these precepts, right?
Right.
Well, if you've practiced Buddhism long enough, right, and you try and defend those precepts, you're like, okay. You find is that living a lay life bumps up against those precepts, right? To not kill, not steal, not lie, not to engage in sexual misconduct or take intoxicants. Reality bumps, like not living a non-monastic life bumps up against those precepts. And so the struggle becomes sort of just living between those shores, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense, and that's the point.
Right.
You
And
know,
so you might think that, oh my goodness, I'm failing at this. But it's more about the tension between those two.
well, yeah, because
There's no failing.
there is no failure.
There's no gain. There's no
The
nothing.
good news is the precepts are pure, but they're not puritanical. You're only really going to understand a precept when you mess it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of the good news. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, these vows are impossible. They're not. I mean, think about it. Think about the 4 bodhisattva vows, the most basic ones we take. You're going to free all beings. You're going to achieve Buddhahood. You're going to enter the Dharma gates. What's the 4th one? You just slipped out of my brain. I vow to free all beings. I vow to end all delusions. I vow to achieve the Buddha path. I vow to enter the Dharma gates. Out of those 4, there's only one that's even humanly possible.
Right.
Yeah, you can get started. You can enter the Dharma gates, but your chances of freeing all you're not going to free all beings, and you're not going to extinguish all your delusions. You're not going to. You might achieve Buddhahood as you understand it. So I mean, here we do every Sunday we take, or every single time we all get together and have a service of any sort, we vow to do the impossible.
Well, even sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, please go ahead.
To achieve Buddhahood, and we're just saying in the next breath, there's nothing to achieve.
There's nothing to achieve.
So it's the circle, which is the point. I think is you just keep trying.
Oh,
Even though it keeps getting further away, there's no way you're going to reach it. Because you're wanting to reach something when you already are it. You just have to stop being.
Well, this is,
else.
see, now you're getting into the very thing that drove Dogen crazy in the first place. It's like, if I've already got Buddha nature, why do I have to practice?
Peeling back the onion.
You peel back the onion, you keep peeling back the onion. And, I think there's a couple things. There's this one great quote out of the Talmud where it says, it's not your job to finish the work, but you're not let off the hook from getting started.
Right.
That really resonated with me when I heard it. And, the other thing that's, I think one of the reasons that John Lennon was such a great prophet, think about the song Tomorrow Never Knows. He just repeats the lyric, play the game of existence to the end of the beginning. What choice do you have?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, your understanding of reality is always going to be faulty. These precepts are going to be really hard to follow. But what else are you going to do?
Keep it out of the ditch.
You're going to keep it out of the ditch. You're going to prevent yourself from floating around in a swimming pool with a bunch of empty liquor bottles.
Yeah.
Every other week.
That's the point.
Every other week, you might try to do that.
Yeah.
I don't mean to dominate.
No, all of your input has been really good, very valuable. Glad you're here.
I'm still very hung up on the nihilist point of view of the whole thing. Is the way that I read it is that, eventually if you look hard enough, you're just looking into a bunch of emptiness, right? And so what is the point of choosing to do anything?
Well,
I would love for you to keep going, because the rest of us here are stuck with the English. we're stuck with this English of know this, know that, know this, know that, and I can't. It has to read differently in other languages.
It does.
So please keep going.
It's the way that I read it. Of course, I read a couple of notations, from ancient Chinese literature, and the way I think it's just me. The way that I read it is, if you look hard enough, you're looking into a bunch of emptiness, and if nothing, if there's no form, and everything is emptiness. But Buddhism doesn't also doesn't give you guidance of what to choose or what not to choose, and that's your own decision to make. So I think I end up in the picture of laying in a pool with a bunch of empty bottles. I think I don't think my own understanding of the Heart Sutra is. I think I let myself into a wrong path. I don't think that's what it meant to be, but I just couldn't get past this logic, my own logic.
Is it the logic of emptiness?
Yeah, the logic of emptiness, and there is no point of doing anything.
Maybe I could interject and just ask, if you traded the word emptiness for lack of independence in every single place, I think to me that it makes a lot more sense.
Togetherness?
Right.
Lack of independence. If you said all
Lack of
dharmas
independence
are marked by a
existence.
lack of independence,
Lack of independence of existence?
take the word emptiness,
Right.
just replace it with lack of independence.
But I want to know what independence.
I'm getting it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, when you say there's no eyes, no ears, no nose, you're really saying there's no independent eyes, there's no independent nose, there's no independent touch. It's just bulky to say that.
Right.
So Guy Armstrong has a book titled Emptiness. I wish he'd started off by saying it's a horrible word that confuses everybody. But my current reading, and I'd love to hear other people weigh in on this, is just that it's not that these things don't exist. You said that. They just don't exist separate from everything else. And that, if you were looking at it from a physical basis, it's obvious, right? The atoms that are separating us aren't really separating us. They're all running into each other. But if you start looking at it as even staring at a column, what is that column? My understanding of it, based on my visual input, based on my tactile input, is so limited.
Sure.
That is not what I think it is, what you said.
Yeah.
But I just think the emptiness word confuses a lot of people, because you start feeling like there's some deep embedded truth where Buddhists are trying to say nothing is here. There is no truth. There's nothing. That's not how I read any of this.
I love where you're going with this. And the first thing it brings up to me is there's one of the great koans, and I can't remember who the two characters are, but his question was, he got like totally obsessed with this idea, do dogs have Buddha nature? So he goes to the abbot and he asks him, do dogs have Buddha nature? And the Buddha's response was mew. And we all translate from the Japanese mew as nothing. I don't think that's what it really means. I think that what the abbot was trying to tell this monk was, a dog doesn't have a resistance to reality like you do as a human. Yeah, so I think it's the same kind of idea. Emptiness doesn't mean emptiness.
It has a negative. In English, it's negative.
Yeah.
Empty.
It's lacking.
Lacking, right?
Something.
Like it's an empty thing, but it's not empty. It's just void. Like space is a void, but it has things in it.
Yeah.
But I like there's also a thing, whatever they call them, saying on, I heard, be aware of how you treat, or how do you treat others? The question was, how do you treat others? And the answer is, there is no other.
There is no other. Yeah.
Quit thinking of it as you and them. It's just us.
There's a saying that the two eyes of Buddhist wisdom are interdependence and impermanence. And the thing I was going to ask you to reflect on, if you thought about this, it seems that the Heart Sutra is entirely about interdependence and doesn't really speak about impermanence in any direct way. Am I right about that, or?
Yeah, I don't know where you would find impermanence in there.
I think you find it in emptiness, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's sort of like, if you go back to I mean, at least classical Buddhism, right? The idea of emptiness arose out of this notion of impermanence, because if everything is like, if everything's impermanent, anytime you try and wrap any conceptual box around it, that box is going to fail at some level.
The box is going to fail, or you're going to get totally preoccupied with the box instead of what's in it.
Right.
Yeah, and I would be willing to bet that Shariputra went back about a week later to Avalokiteshvara. I was like, look, I still don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he picked up, with impermanence. So there may be another sutra out there somewhere written on a palm leaf where, Shariputra still didn't get it. Avalokiteshvara started with impermanence.
Right.
Yeah. So now we see, don't get hung up on these things because you may not have the right understanding of what real and unreal are. And as Matthew just said, and all these things are going to be connected. He might have come back a week later and said, well, none of this stuff is going to be here that long anyway. So don't get hung up on it from that reason. So I think,
and also I think Nirvana, I think, at least from my limited understanding of classical Buddhism, it's the one thing that you can't really talk about, right? When I learned about that in history, early AP history, right? I mean, where Nirvana is undescribable, right? It's the one thing that you can't say or think about. And I learned about that. I thought, oh, that's a cop-out. But then later on, I came to really appreciate that, because then, right, if everything is impermanent, right, Nirvana, again, this is you get caught into a linguistic trap where you're trying to talk about something, the one thing that can't be talked about, because to talk or think about something involves some sort of permanent concept, right?
Or a concept.
Or any
conceivable.
Right.
Because
in a world that's intrinsically impermanent.
the way that
it's nothing but suffering.
Right.
Yeah.
And Nirvana is no suffering.
Right.
You can't conceive of that.
Imagine traveling back in time 200 or 300 years ago, before the Kalahari Kung Bushmen had much contact with outsiders, and explain to them what a giant squid was. They're going to say, they're going, this guy's out of his damn mind.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would think, the emptiness and form and all this. So there is no definite, explanation of a certain thing. That's what I comprehend. Because everything is constantly transforming into something else, and you can't pinpoint this one thing as being definitely it is this.
Mm-hmm.
It is constantly transforming, and also, trying to pinpoint something is form.
I think you just answered Matthew's question. Thank you. Yeah.
And there is this single character in Chinese, I think in Japanese too, like the same character, that says you're hang up on something.
You're hung up on something?
You're hanging up on something, a concept, a thing, something that is bothering you, or something makes you feel jealous, or and that is
what is the actual word? How would you say that?
zhi.
Zhu?
J-U.
Zhi means, well, how do I spell it? Z-H-I. That's the Chinese.
Z-H-I.
Z-H-I. That's the Chinese pronunciation of it. And that's kind of, thought of as the why you're suffering from like the basic reason you're suffering is because you have this fear, and you have something that is bothering you or worrying you.
Well, that's the second noble truth.
Right.
Which you just described, or that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So I didn't study the from the beginning.
Yeah.
The second noble truth. I think that. Yeah.
So you're hung up on this and you're not going with the flow, basically. You're not just allowing.
You're not allowing
The doubt.
things to unfold the way they should be unfolding. You're blocking the flow.
And that's Taoism. Right?
Yeah, you're blocking reality.
You're blocking the
Feng shui.
reality.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is-
You're totally blocking reality.
It is, I think, to me, reading English version of the script and a lot of explanation has been very helpful, because all of these has been translated in 20th century or late 19th century. So these are contemporary English. It's easier to connect to. Versus a lot of explanations in Chinese were written 300 or 400 years ago, and people still talk in that way. The contemporary explanations still talk that way. It is very hard to, connect to on a personal level.
Like reading Elizabethan English and
Right.
you don't get it.
Right. Yeah.
On that, it's kind of very tough.
So you learned about these teachings obviously in the Chinese context first, right? And they're still, and all of the explanations are in sort of like old
Ancient Chinese.
Right.
And
I wouldn't say I studied or learned. A lot of these concepts are just in our day-to-day language. It's so permeated in the day-to-day conversation. But, you just take it as is and as part of the, your narratives, but just never understand the wisdom behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I start to understand more when I read the English version.
Oh, really?
That's
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Well,
think that's the main hiccup between the Eastern basic philosophy and the Western basic philosophy. Eastern is you got to roll with it. And the Western is, oh no, I'm going to make it.
I'm going to make it. Yeah.
I'm gonna make it do what I want.
This is the way it's going to happen. And yeah, I'm back and forth between both of them constantly.
So we've got two that haven't said much at all. Any insights or questions, or what do you think?
I was trying to remember which Western philosopher was talking about forms. Was it Plato?
Plato's
Yeah.
realm of forms.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
because
form
he
of forms.
said, or like somebody was saying like, well, for example, like, see, I'm not too familiar with it, but like, from what I understand it, it's like there is a concept or like a form out there of like the ideal table or like the ideal chair, and that like, and then you can.
That's the perfect example. I mean,
It's the
of a chair.
it's the concept and not
Yeah.
the actual thing. Like that
Oh,
chair over
yeah,
there is
interesting.
flawed because it's not the concept. And that's the realm of the form, from what I understand. But it's been years since.
Yeah, and I really appreciated what Matt said about lack of independence. That helped me understand emptiness a little bit more.
I totally did make it.
Yeah.
Just listening. I like what he said about interconnectedness.
I did too.
Like we're all
Right.
interconnected. Just listen.
I think, yeah, that's where, I mean, if you really want to get down to it, that's where karma is. Like, I feel when you try and talk about karma to people who are not familiar with Buddhism, they think it's some sort of superstitious thing, but no, it's very fundamental,
Yeah.
right? Because everything's interconnected, right? If what is real are causal relations between events,
Yeah.
then karma isn't a superstition. It's absolutely essential to understand.
Well, yeah, because I think that the top 40 concept of karma is some kind of like weird retribution. You
Right.
know, but it's really a lot simpler than that and much more complex at the same time. It's you're going to invent the world you have to live in. You're
Right.
inventing it all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing about emptiness that
Sure.
helps me deal with emptiness. Just to forsake nihilism and all that, because that's a scary concept to me. But in a simple, very conceptual way that I thought of emptiness approaching the subject, because I think I like the word empty, like I like that is in there. And this is very simple, like metaphor, but to me, if you say like visualize like a treasure chest or like a chest, it's inherently empty as like a chest. And you can, for me, like you could say like set some vinyl records in there. You can just put like, you can fill it up or you can make it empty. And no matter if it's empty or totally full, it's still a treasure chest. And if it's empty, there's the potential to fill it. And if it's full, there's the potential to empty it. And that's what I take emptiness as, is like, it's what you make out of it or what you do with it, but the inherent nature of that chest is empty.
Yeah.
And there's nothing inherently wrong with an empty chest. Like, you don't look at an empty chest and say, that's a bad chest.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Bad chest.
Yeah.
Bad chest.
That's how I came to terms with the term empty. And that's why I like empty, is there's so much potential
Yeah.
and lack of potential.
It's a vessel.
So
Yes.
More of a vessel than a thing. I grew up vessel. I don't know how.
So it sounds like as we go forward, we've got two choices. Either a dog that doesn't perceive boundaries to his own Buddhahood, or an alcoholic floating around with empty liquor bottles.
Cut and dry, man.
Cut and dry.
You're either in it or you're out.
You're either in it or you're out of it. All right. Well, that's all that I had. Happy everybody was here, and we'll pick up again next week. So.
We answered that question.
All done. All done.
We
Yeah.
can do the.
I'm never coming here again.
Yeah, we could do the 4 vows. Nobody was keeping time, so I don't.
I was watching, I just didn't make a ding noise.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was doing it in my head.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad
That's
to-
been counting the whole time.
Yeah.
1 to
Right.
60, 1 to 60.
We're up to about 60.
Very nice.
Did pretty good.
Okay. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. All right. That's all, folks.